Hey guys, this is day 5 of the Civil War. We the war's going to end. There's only 5 days in this chapter or era, and we have barely scratched the surface of the Civil War. I mean, just yeah, there's so much more to the Civil War than this. But anyway, so when we left off with day 4, there were 2 turning points of the Civil War. All right, so most wars have 1 turning point. This one kind of has 2. One in the east and one in the west. In the east, it was Gettysburg, which was a 3-day battle where Lee, he was winning the first day, and what he should have done is retreated after the first day of fighting because the Union had all their guys up on these like hills in a really good position, but he kept fighting, and on the 3rd day he lost like 10,000 men, which the Confederacy, remember, we don't have a lot of people in the South at the time. We don't have the population, so losing 10,000 troops is, yeah, it's a big deal. So Lee's army gets, it gets pretty badly beaten at Gettysburg, and then over in the west, Vicksburg was the last Confederate stronghold on the Mississippi River. So once Vicksburg surrendered, which they held out as long as they could, it got to the point where the people in the town were eating like dogs and stuff, so rats and things like that, because they didn't have a way to get supplies. But once they surrendered, the Union had complete control of the river. So from New Orleans all the way up, they had control of the river, which split the Confederacy into 2, so that these states over here, including Texas, couldn't help with the war. And remember, both of those happened within a day of each other. And Vicksburg was July 4th, 1863. So the war was going pretty good for the Union. And there's a saying in history, hindsight is 20/20. It means that when you look back at something, you know what's going to happen because we live in the present. But if you were living in the Civil War, I mean, it didn't always look like the Union was going to win. There were several times where it looked like the Confederates might get to the capital, or people wanted to end the war. And so, yeah, in 1864, Lincoln has to get reelected. Okay, just because there's a war going on doesn't mean he gets to be president until the war's over. He was elected in 1860. It's now 1864. He's got to run again, and so he runs for reelection. Luckily for Lincoln, things are going as good as they are. You got Gettysburg and Vicksburg. Sherman marched to the sea and presented Savannah, Georgia, to the president as, I think it was a Christmas present that year. Christmas present, birthday president. Anyway, so Lincoln runs against McClellan. That's who runs against him as a Democrat. And Lincoln, you can see Lincoln gets most of the states. McClellan only got Oregon and Kentucky, New Jersey, and Delaware. So, yeah, Lincoln beat him pretty bad. But Lincoln was worried there for a while because things weren't going. And things in Lincoln's personal life weren't great either. He lost a son. Yeah, it was. Anyway, things are looking up for Lincoln, or at least for now. In his second inaugural address, he actually brings up slavery this time since he's passed the Emancipation Proclamation. And this is big. He says that once the South is defeated, we should be nice, right? Sportsmanlike conduct. We should not rub it in their faces that we won, because that will cause. They're already going to be. The South is already going to be mad when we lose. But then if you make it. If you rub their noses in it and stuff, then it's like, okay, it makes them resentful, and they're going to take it out on African Americans, which is what happened. So, anyway, so Lincoln gets reelected. The end of the war comes in 1865. Richmond is finally captured. Lee's army's barely holding on. I mean, he's now. It's barely an army. I mean, he still fights some battles. I'm not going to say there wasn't Yeah. At this point, he's really hoping that um, I don't know. I don't know what he was hoping for. To where I guess just keep killing Union soldiers until they give up. But anyway, Lee finally realizes that there's no point in going on. He's wasting life. Um, and anyway, so he decides to meet with General Grant at a place called Appomattox Courthouse, which is a town in Virginia, and there he signs the surrender with Grant. So this is a painting, not a very good painting. I've seen better paintings that are more realistic, but anyway. Now, interesting story here, because the Civil War is full of weird things like the coincidences. The house that they surrender at. So Appomattox Courthouse is the name of the town. It's not the building, right? So they choose a house in Appomattox owned by this guy named Wilmer McLean. And what's really crazy is Wilmer McLean originally lived in a town called Manassas, or he lived around Manassas, or he lived around the Bull Run Creek. And the first Battle of Bull Run happened right there on his farm. So after that, he decided to get rid of the farm and to move somewhere else, kind of out of the way. So he moved to Appomattox Courthouse, and then several years later, they decide to sign the surrender in his living room. And so after the war, he claimed that the war started in his backyard and ended in his parlor, because it kind of did. The first big battle was at Bull Run. Fort Sumter was at the start, but the first big battle was Bull Run, and then Lee surrendered at his house in Appomattox Courthouse. So, kind of weird. So this pretty much ends the war. Once everybody hears that Lee has surrendered, they give up. Although there's some Confederates that they actually have to show them like newspapers. They're like, look, the war's over. Lee surrendered. So a few days after the surrender at Appomattox Courthouse, Lincoln decides to go to a play, not to a movie. There's always people in class that are like, I thought he was watching a movie. Like, no, this is 1860s. They don't have video cameras yet. They barely have cameras. So yeah, he's sitting there watching a play. There's an actor named John Wilkes Booth who was super famous. He's one of those guys that all the ladies were in love with him and stuff. And he was super popular for playing like Shakespeare and stuff. And yep, so he snuck up behind him into the president's into the balcony or whatever, into his booth. John Wilkes Booth. Anyway, and he shoots him with a little Derringer pistol, which is just a single shot. He had a knife for backup, but I mean he shot him in the head. And after that, you can see here he jumped onto the stage, yelled "Sic Semper Tyrannis," which means like this is what tyrants get, or yeah, this is what happens to tyrants. And then he runs off the stage, and people are kind of like, is that part? Cause he's an actor, so it's like, oh look, John Wilkes Booth is making a guest appearance, and then people realize, it takes them a second. They realize what's happened. Like, oh my god. So eventually, John Wilkes Booth was trapped in a barn, and he was shot by, I think it was cavalry. Some cavalry surrounded him. He came out with a gun, and they all shot him. So he was killed. Some other people were tried, and some people were executed for the conspiracy, because it wasn't just John Wilkes Booth. Good movie if you want to go watch it. It's kind of boring. I mean, for a teenager, but it's called The Conspirator. It's about Mary Surratt, who was. It's debated whether or not she was involved, but it's a good movie. It's about her trial. But anyway, if you ever hear when somebody says your name will be Mud, that comes from one of the guys he was found not guilty, or he was acquitted, but his name was Samuel Mudd, I think, And even after that, like everybody kind of hated him and stuff, even though he's found not guilty. So if you ever hear that, your name will be Mud. That it's Mudd, I think. Yeah, it's not mud like mud, like dirt and water. But anyway, crap. Sorry, I'm rambling on here. So after this, Andrew Johnson becomes the new president. He was Lincoln's vice president, and remember Lincoln. I'm always impressed that his body. He was such a tough guy. He was born on the frontier, and he's pretty tough. It took him like 9 hours for him to die after being shot in the head. So he was a tough guy, and not. We'll talk about this in the next thing, but when he dies, so does his whole policy of let's be nice to the South after the war. So it's ironic that these Southerners killed Lincoln. It's like he was actually probably your best chance at having a peaceful conclusion, like a good conclusion to the war. But anyway, okay, well, I think that is it. Yep, that is the end of the slideshow. So, all right, guys, I will see y'all later. Take care.